So this topic is very relevant, especially in our contemporary. It's been relevant for our time for quite some time, but it's also even more relevant given the current circumstances with the Chapel Hill shootings and the Muslim organizations kind of meeting and Obama delivering a summit address to the Muslims regarding extremism and the concept of what's going on in our country, as well as some of the foreign policy and the idea of Islamophobia. Now, I'll address, before we kind of give some understanding to some of that current, I think we want to understand some of the backdrop before we get to the present. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this topic out in three sections, in three parts. The first part, I want to address the political and social discourse and narrative of extremism or Islamic extremism as it's understood and related to us in our contemporary culture and in the US. Second part will be ways in which we as American Muslims contribute to that narrative without even realizing that connection. And finally, I want to address the issue of radicalization among our youth. So with that, I'll just jump right into part one. And part one, I think it is no surprise to all of us, and to any American for that matter, that Islam and extremism have been intricately linked together. Okay? And this has been the political discourse and narrative since before 9/11, but especially after 9/11. So after 9/11, what we needed, and by we, I'm going to use the we as in because we are American Muslims, and so we have as much claim to citizenship as anybody else. And we needed an enemy. And so we created an ideal one that was ethnically different, that held a different understanding of the world, and had associated symbols with them that could be otherized. We had gone through some of the, and still going through the racism of the African American civil rights, which is still an ongoing process, I believe. But we needed to move past to more of, and there needed to be a way to be able to portray an ideal enemy that could bind Americans together. And that was a way of scapegoating. This is called the scapegoating theory. Whenever there's a pain or suffering within a nation or a group of people, they find somebody that they need to blame. And those people were Muslims at this time. And they served as being this ideal enemy that was from the Far East that people didn't know much about. And could be distanced from the American dream or be seen as a threat to it. And so this association was created, and this went through two phases up until the present. And the first phase was during the Bush era. During the Bush era was the crusader-like mentality, where during that heat of the moment, Bush came forward and kind of created the us versus them narrative. And he otherized the Muslims and said that, and if you side with them, then you're against us. So this dichotomy, black and white thinking, to divide the world into good and bad, American and with the Americans, or Muslim and with the Muslims. So this sort of crusader clash of civilizations, East versus West kind of mentality. And this thereby justified much of the atrocities that took place and the invasions to the Muslim world. And much of the atrocities that took place both on our own soil and outside of our soil, such as the FBI surveillance programs and the opening of Guantanamo Bay and the and the discrimination against Muslims, as well as other implications, which were things like the Abu Ghraib incident, which was a horrendous issue, which was terrorism at its peak, nonetheless, in Iraq, where they humiliated through a chain of commands, which is essentially state-sponsored terrorism at this moment, to fund the humiliation and torture of Muslims in the Muslim world, and to do so in this country through the process of waterboarding and other things that was there. So we have to acknowledge that it was not pretty, okay? And some of the implications that it had in our society was that it created a heightened sense of Islamophobia among people. Americans were wary of Muslims.